Hello, everyone. Welcome to Election Talk. My name is Dave Trotter, and thank you for joining me today. I haven't been on for a few weeks because I was in Europe, but now I'm back. My laptop that I had previously totally fried, totally destroyed when I was in Prague. Now I got a new laptop, so we're back to normal. So I'll be doing videos today and in the near future. We're going to talk about Greenland. We're going to eventually talk about the Ontario elections and how that might impact the federal elections in Canada, which are coming up. But today we are focusing on American politics, and we are focusing on the Michigan Senate race. Maybe, who knows? But today we're really going to be focusing on Pete Buttigieg because as you know, I did a video a few weeks ago about Pete Buttigieg where he said that he was going to be running for the U.S. Senate, possibly. But it seems like that has changed. Now, before we get into the poll and what's happening in Michigan, on my Substack, which you'll see the link down below for my Substack and also a QR code if you want to scan that, I wrote a whole entire article about why Trump won Michigan. So if you want to go ahead and look at this, you'll have a lot of good information through some statistical information in there as well to talk about why, why Trump won Michigan. So that's something. Please go to votingtrend.com. If you want to become a paid subscriber there, that's a way that you can support this YouTube channel as well as my Voting Trend Substack. I put a lot more information on my Substack than I do here. But anyway, let's go ahead and look at the poll that came out a few days ago. So you can see released on March 8th, there was a poll that was done by Target Insight on behalf of MIRS News. It was done between March 3rd through 6th, involved 600 voters, of whom 41% were Republicans and 41% were Democrats. The other 18% consider themselves independent. So our margin of error is plus or minus 4 percentage points. Now, they do talk about the gubernatorial race, but we're not getting into that. We're going to talk about the Senate race because they have a poll with Gretchen Whitmer versus Mike Rogers. Mike Rogers was the one who ran against Alyssa Slotkin in the last race. Seems like he is the one that everybody's talking about to run for the Republicans for this next Senate race. And Pete Buttigieg was in there as well. And I mentioned the Pete Buttigieg poll in my last video that I did about them. Now, in that poll, we can see Pete Buttigieg is now ahead of Mike Rogers, 46% to 44%. Now, obviously, that's within the margin of error, so it is essentially a tied race, but it is a 2-point lead nonetheless. Now, one thing I find interesting is only 11% say that they're undecided when they look at Pete Buttigieg versus Mike Rogers. Now, usually you have a larger, unsure or undecided number when the name IDs are not as strong. Now, obviously, Pete Buttigieg has given himself a national profile. That makes sense. But if we look at the Gretchen Whitmer race against Mike Rogers, we see Whitmer is up by 1. 42% to 41, but we can see that the other candidate are not sure or unsure is up to 17% when we add Whitmer onto there. And I think that is a huge, huge number. So you can see the difference between Buttigieg and Whitmer's numbers go down by 4% in that one. And then when they add Mike Rogers, he's in both of them. Mike Rogers against Whitmer only goes down 3%. So you do see this drop. But I am kind of surprised with Whitmer being the governor of Michigan and people assuming that people would know more about her in Michigan, that this race would have less undecided voters. But it doesn't seem like that's the case. Now, Pete Buttigieg, these numbers might not mean anything because Pete Buttigieg has now said or is indicating that he is expected to pass on the Senate bid. So this is reporting done late last night, early this morning by CNN, saying Pete Buttigieg expected to pass on Senate bid, setting up potential 2028 run. And here we go. We can see Pete Buttigieg is expected to forego a run for Michigan's open Senate seat in 2026, according to two people familiar with the former Transportation Secretary's plans, setting up a potential presidential bid in 2028. Now, that essentially means that the polls that we're looking at when it comes to Buttigieg here might just be useless because he might not run. It did look like he was starting to improve, but right now we are still basically a year and a half away from the election. And whoever the Democrat's going to be when that election comes, it's going to eventually even out. Okay. You got to realize this time in a lot of elections, we don't even know who's going to run, and we're just throwing names up against the wall to see who sticks. Now, the question becomes when you look at this Buttigieg situation here with him deciding, maybe I'm not going to run for Michigan Senate. The question has to be, because everyone's had her names on their lips as far as running for president, does Gretchen Whitmer also fall into this category? Now, obviously, Gretchen Whitmer has more of an open door to run for this Senate seat if she wants to, okay? Because I think it would have been kind of messy with Buttigieg and Whitmer in a primary, and I think that might have caused a lot of unnecessary battle between the two. Two candidates are probably very familiar to the voters and very similar to one another, would cause an issue. So I'm wondering, with Buttigieg making this announcement, if all of a sudden he's switching because he knows Whitmer is maybe going to run for that Senate seat. But they have talked about her running for president. So to me, the question then should be, is it smart for Pete Buttigieg to run for president? Now, I have been an advocate for him running for president, and a lot of people say, well, because he's a gay man or something, he can't win, and especially in states like Michigan. Well, first of all, he was leading in the polls in Michigan. Second of all, even though it was a liberal place, he has won an election in the Midwest, in Indiana. And finally, and this is what we're going to talk about today, when he ran for president before, he did really well in places that, maybe we didn't expect him to do really well. He was definitely the overperformer of 2020. And you got to remember, with the 2020 election and James Clyburn all of a sudden somehow being the kingmaker according to the media, but then you had COVID and everything. 2020 is a hard primary to talk about. It's just really, really difficult. But another Senate seat that I want to talk about, and I'm actually writing about this now. So if you want to join my Substack and be a paid subscriber on there, I am going to be releasing on Monday my analysis of the Wisconsin election results and why Trump won Wisconsin. Is you had Tammy Baldwin, okay, a very progressive lesbian who signed on to Medicare for all with Bernie Sanders, and yet she won in Wisconsin. So I don't buy into this, oh, well, he's gay, so therefore he can't win. He can win elections. Tammy Baldwin has won them in Wisconsin. So I do believe that it's not an issue. If it does become an issue, it's not because the candidates themselves are pushing it. It's because the party itself is pushing it. And it seems like maybe those within the party who pushed identity politics a lot, Gavin Newsom, for example, there might be some changing trends there. It's seeming to be that identity politics is starting to fade away, whereas you see Bernie Sanders out there actually, having a lot of meetings out there, having a lot of rallies out there, people lining up. I mean, John Lovett on Pod Save America said that the line that he saw at Bernie Sanders' rally was one of the biggest lines that he had ever seen. And he worked for Barack Obama, who had huge crowds. So that's a good sign that we're moving more toward the economic populism. We're moving more toward economic issues because, you know what? Price of eggs still do matter. And with Pete Buttigieg running, a lot of people say he might be out of touch with those issues. Maybe yes, maybe no. I mean, we're this time in the presidential campaign, and which would eventually be 1976, no one had Jimmy Carter as a potential candidate to win the presidency. In 1992, or this time in the 1992 election cycle, which would have been 1989, nobody thought that Bill Clinton was going to win. It was Mario Cuomo, it was Jesse Jackson, it was maybe Al Gore, somebody like that. So it's really early right now to see who would win. But I do want to go and look at the 2020 Iowa Democratic presidential caucuses, and then we'll go ahead and look at the New Hampshire primary. So as you can see, Pete Buttigieg didn't win the quote-unquote popular vote, but he won one more state delegate than Bernie Sanders did in Iowa. Now, Bernie Sanders did win more of the popular vote in the first vote. And to me, the first vote is the most important thing. So in the Iowa caucuses, what people do is they get into their room, right? And in their first vote, they go ahead and go into their corners of what candidate they support. And if a candidate doesn't have enough votes, I think there's a certain threshold that they have to hit, then those people have to go over to one of the other candidates that are there. So the first vote is very much like a first primary vote, or if we look at Australian politics, we can see the primary vote as it is called there. It is that first vote. If we look at the first round in France, it would be a vote like that too. We see Bernie Sanders was first, but we see Pete Buttigieg was second. Now, if we look at the counties where Pete Buttigieg did well, we can see that he has a lot of rural counties in especially the east and northeast part of Iowa. Now, two important things here. First, this is where Democrats really want to make an impact to try to pick up a congressional seat in Iowa. This was one of the sleeper seats I said to watch, and it actually looked like it could have flipped at first. The second thing is this eastern part of the state is where Barack Obama eventually made his campaign to go on and win the presidency in 2008. Him winning in these rural areas is quite impressive. Now, if we look at the first vote, now that is the final vote. Now let's go ahead and look at the first vote where people picked a few more people. You can see Elizabeth Warren won out here. Elizabeth Warren kept it, but you see a lot of these places where Joe Biden won in the first round, but didn't have enough votes. They had to distribute. You could see a lot of them, or a few of them at least, went over to Pete Buttigieg. So I think Pete Buttigieg is one of those people who can go one side to the other, kind of play that middle quite well. Now, if we go ahead and look at what happened in New Hampshire back in 2020. Now, the important thing to remember about New Hampshire is that New Hampshire is, this is Bernie Sanders' territory, right? Bernie Sanders is in Vermont, the next state over. He did quite well in 2016. If we want to look at 2016 results, here we go. He won 60% of the vote in 2016. He had a significant drop in 2020, and a lot of that drop came, yes, to Elizabeth Warren from neighboring Massachusetts and Amy Klobuchar, interestingly enough, but the biggest one did come from Pete Buttigieg. Now, if we go down here and we look at the municipalities, we kind of see it a little bit different. We see that Pete Buttigieg does a lot better in the southeast part of Massachusetts, where, you have the Concord, kind of going up into this area and down. You have the Portsmouth, but it does look like Portsmouth here technically went for Bernie. But in and around Portsmouth, Concord, New Hampshire, or Manchester, and other places, you see a lot of those places going for Buttigieg, and quite closely. You do see some of these smaller communities also. Bernie did well in Portsmouth. He did well in places bordering Vermont as well as down here in the southwest part. But if we look at the counties, we can see, even though Portsmouth is here, we do see that Buttigieg did quite well in the places that have larger populations. Now, this is kind of a difference between what we saw in Iowa. In Iowa, we saw Buttigieg doing well in the places that have lower populations. But if we got places like Iowa City and other places, we do see a bit of a difference. So, as a matter of fact, let's go down. Does it have any other? No, it doesn't. But the point is, overall, if Pete Buttigieg is making this run for president, he seems to be in a good place based on his performance in 2020. Can he repeat that performance? I believe so, just because of the fact that there probably is going to be less intense competition. Yeah, there were 274 people running for the Democratic Party nomination in 2020, it seemed like, but there were a lot of candidates who were legitimate good candidates that hardly saw any votes. This seems to be a lot in Democratic Party politics, but the Republican Party politics, primary politics in 2016 as well. The question is, does a candidate need to come out of the gate this early running for president? I don't know, but we are seeing Bernie in Iowa, though I'm pretty sure he's not going to run for president. But we are seeing Tim Walz now going to Iowa, talking to voters there. So I think at least immediately we are seeing Pete Buttigieg and Tim Walz as the first two potential candidates to be running. But we do see a lot of people not going to Iowa. My guess is if Tim Walz runs, that keeps Amy Klobuchar out. She wouldn't run. We haven't seen Elizabeth Warren there either. Obviously, Joe Biden, we have not seen there. So it could be an interesting primary. And the question is, I guess, if you're Buttigieg or Walz or whatever, do you want to jump in this early? Is it worth it jumping in this early? Or do you just play, hang low, just let the cycle play out? And don't necessarily slam the door, because even though Buttigieg says he's passing on the Michigan Senate race, if he all of a sudden jumps into the presidential race, then he kind of hurts his chance of maybe saying, oh crap, I don't want to do this. I want to go back into the U.S. Senate race. So I don't think he's going to make any announcement before 2026, or at least the day after the filing deadline, maybe in Michigan, because he might want to keep that door open. But again, does Gretchen Whitmer? This tells me, with the news that we're seeing out of Michigan, this tells me that Whitmer is going to run for the Senate and Buttigieg is going to run for president. We'll see if that happens. I'm not sure, but we'll see. All right, well, thank you all very much. I wanted to do this video today. I will have my regular camera back. I'm doing everything by webcam, and all of what you see down here as far as the frame, just because I can't find a battery to my camera. So we'll be back to regular camera view hopefully soon. All right, thank you all very much. I'll talk to you later on. Make sure to subscribe to my Substack. I put a lot more on my Substack than I do here on my YouTube channel. So thank you all very much. I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.